Hi, I'm Joel H. Brewster, and I'm no stranger to horror. And this is a podcast where I talk about the big and small of the genre, as well as try to convert you from being a casual horror fan to being a person like myself as a full-blown horror film fanatic. With me today, I have MadelineKarita Fleming.
Yes.
And we're going to be discussing not only the movie Candyman from 1992, but also her own film, which we'll be getting into in just one moment here. Madeline, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing because I get to talk about horror, which is it's the best thing ever. This is the coolest thing ever. Thanks for letting me be on West Coast Strange. I just love what you do. I love your Instagram. I love your social medias. I'm there with you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to get into horror with a horror fanatic. This is me great.
Oh yeah, I was raised as a horror fanatic. My grandparents met on Halloween. My parents met on Halloween.
Oh wow.
So it's been generations of horror fanatics since the 50s and the 40s. So.
Oh wow. Do you remember what the first horror film you got into was yourself?
The first horror film I ever saw, which I was too young to be watching this. I'm telling you, I love my parents, but now I'm questioning yo, for real? For real, you? The first one I was consciously aware of, Night of the Living Dead.
Okay.
I was probably about, I don't even understand how I remember this. I was probably about 3 or 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, I remember little things from then. I remember seeing the Nightmare on Elm Street commercials. Mm-hmm. I'm aging myself here, but we're not going to talk about which Nightmare on Elm Street. But the first horror film I had ever really kind of woke me up and was just whoa, was Night of the Living Dead, the original 1964 version.
Okay. What really stood out for that movie for you? What really spoke to you from that film? Do you remember?
When the black guy got shot.
Yeah. At the end?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the monsters were already scary because, it's the strange lighting, it's the atmosphere, it was the creepy tone to all of it. But that's a movie that a lot of horror fans say they don't want to get political, but then they'll name movies Night of the Living Dead, which is a completely political movie.
100%. Yeah.
It's 100%. When the black guy gets shot is kind of the moment where I was just whoa, horror can be a little bit more than just blood. Even the blood is cool. I mean, Johnny Depp dying in Nightmare on Elm Street is an epic scene,
for sure. But
it's not the same as when you see how the social unrest of the 1960s is brought up in a film like Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, and I think that since the inception of horror in general, that when you look at even before horror, folklore, right, and how that was to kind of warn us not to do certain things, not to go in the forest late at night and such like that. It's always kind of been ingrained in that. And like you said, people seem to bring up now, they seem to say things I don't want horror to be political, but it's like you said, it's always been political. It's always been there.
Yeah, it's always been political. We make movies about witches getting burned at the stake. It's always been political. This is how horror works. If it doesn't mean anything to your life, then it doesn't have that much of an impact. And how scary can it really be?
Mm-hmm. Are you enjoying the new kind of renaissance of kind of a harder push into the social aspect of horror? Are you enjoying what's coming on new in horror, or do you like the classics that weren't as they were political, but they weren't as the voice of the story wasn't told by marginalized groups, I should say?
I mean, I love all of it. I love all of horror. I'm definitely a horror fan, but I love seeing the more adult version of horror because when it comes to marginalized groups and especially Black culture, mm-hmm. We're far from Scream, Blackula, Scream.
Yeah,
we are so far from Scream, Blackula, Scream. We're even a million miles from Vampire in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It's no longer, horror no longer lives in a space where it kind of, it can't be too direct and it can't be too scary. It always has to have this kind of, this kind of humor to it. It has to have this kind of minstrel show to it in order to be able to bring the view of marginalized voices, especially African-American voices, to the horror genre. And, as you can tell, as lots of people know, it's the stereotype and the trope of the Black person dies first.
Yes. Yeah.
The first time that you would think that that was a million miles from where we are now, but it wasn't that long before, LL Cool J was the only Black man to ever make it to the end of a horror movie.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny
Even
because
though My Hat Is Like a Shark's Fin is probably the worst and best song anybody has ever made in their entire life.
that's so funny you bring that up because I remember that song. So I remember everything about that era of horror, but I remember that song so vividly. I remember how like big LL Cool J was at that time when he was in that. And then I think it was around the time of Any Given Sunday. It was just like
Mm-hmm.
back in the day when we used to get a song directly with the movie. And I loved the mix of Deep Blue Sea as well as LL Cool J's like kind of the song that came out with that.
Oh yeah, deepest, bluest, my hat is like a shark's fin. It's just, I still remember that, and that was also a time where, Tyra Banks and Busta Rhymes were in like horror movies,
Mhm.
and Jada Pinkett.
Yeah, and then a little later, then it was Kelly Rowland because I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Kelly Rowland, Kelly Rowland against Freddie, but
yeah,
even it was Kelly Rowland against Freddy Krueger. It was a fun time to be a brown person in horror movies, but there was still the what's his actor? I can't remember what his name is. I think his last name is Pernault, and it was a black actor who has died the most in any horror movies ever. Like I think he has the record for the most times of being a dead black man in a horror movie.
oh
I
wow,
want to say his name is Henry or Harry Pinoit. I can't pronounce it, but it starts with a P. And you've seen him die a million times, but you don't really know his name.
Mhm.
And I think that was like that was definitely an interesting point in horror for marginalized groups, especially African Americans. Um, and even later we had Ice Cube in Anaconda.
Yep,
I mean, Ice Cube didn't live very long in Anaconda,
yeah,
but he was a pretty good part of Anaconda.
yeah, and then he was later in what's it, Ghost of Mars? Do you remember Ghost of Mars? Do you remember that movie? It was like a sci-fi sort of horror film. It was Ice
I
Cube on.
remember Ghost of Mars. I don't know if I got a chance to actually see Ghost of Mars.
Oh, okay. It's a really weird sci-fi horror film that
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a zombie aspect to it, but it was had like B movie quality to it, and it's one of those films I just recommend. I'm gonna put it in the show notes, but it's like one of those weird movies that I want to revisit now. I'm sure I loved it when I was younger, but it's one of those things where I almost don't want to watch it again because I might ruin it for myself. But it was like great Ice Cube movie, and Jason Statham was in it, so it's like a weird original cast. But like, yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was another lead role for him too, where Ice Cube survived.
Yeah. So, I mean, horror for African Americans has definitely changed over the last, well, let's say since it's a real incarnation during the well, we actually had our own horror during the 60s.
Mhm.
Not necessarily talking about films like where I Walked with a Zombie, where Black people were kind of the scenery,
Yeah,
or Serpent in the Rainbow, where once again the story happens in a Black country with Black culture and voodoo and hoodoo, but it was still centered around the white male lead. And
yeah.
when it comes to Serpent in the Rainbow, he got what he deserved. They told him not to be doing that, and he did it anyway. So I used to feel really bad for him. And then growing up, I was just like, but you could have not came there and colonized that man's daughter. But we ain't gonna talk about that. Uh, you could have not did that. And I was like, oh, you know what? I don't feel bad for him now as an adult.
Yeah, it works as a better cautionary tale that way.
Yeah, it's a better cautionary tale that way. But horror has changed greatly. And I mean, it's kind of weird watching the same person who was on Key and Peele create these like masterpieces of horror.
Absolutely.
It's not something that you would have expected.
No, and now it's just like now I think that what's really interesting with Jordan Peele is that from there, now I'm excited when anyone does something different. Now when I could hear absolutely anyone directing something differently, like across any board, I would just be interested to see what it is now because Jordan Peele really opened up that door, obviously for marginalized groups in a horror as a genre specifically. Oops, slip there. But also I feel like he opened up the door in film in general, which I don't think he gets more credit for too. Where now it's like open up the door that anyone can make. I'm interested to see anyone's story now outside of what we're usually known for. So I think that he did like an amazing thing for Black filmmakers, but also as the whole industry as a whole. And I think he deserves like representation for that too, which is really cool about him.
Yeah, he definitely does.
Yeah.
He changed the game for horror. I mean, Get Out was something that it was like a breath of fresh air when it came to like horror and marginalized people. And it was time for something new. Like I was getting tired of seeing the same cookie cutter horror. the same films. It was just hitting a point where horror had become very bland, and it was time to open it up to new markets and new groups.
Absolutely. From there, have you seen the show Them yet? Did you check that out?
I have not. Okay. I have not seen Them yet.
It is very controversial, but I watched it to the end, and I personally liked it. But it was a lot, but it was good. It was very interesting, but yeah, there's a lot of controversy behind it because of some of the scenes. So, yeah. So anyone listening to this as well as yourself, watch out for it. But like it's really good for the genre. I think it's really interesting, and yeah. As I've discussed before in the show, for Jordan Peele just opened up kind of a door in a sense that I feel like there's a lot more that he not only got his vision out there, but he like kind of felt like he greenlit, not himself, but like studios now are more willing to greenlight like other Black filmmakers' films.
Yep. Truth. It was more like the door got to be open to more creativity, I think, to more stories, to more cultures. And I think that's part of what horror is. If horror doesn't keep evolving, it no longer becomes relevant and or scary. So
before we dive into this film, I want to hear more about your short film, because you said it's coming out. Well, you can dive into tell us when it's coming out and everything like that, because you told me a little bit about it off air. But why I really wanted to hear more from you is when you were describing to me, when you messaged me on Instagram, when we started our conversation, you said it has elements of both Saw and Audition, which are two like horror films that like really like inspired me in the unapologetic, no holds barred sort of gore aspect. But I really want to hear like what your story is about in that regard.
Well, the short film I produced is called Ouroboros, and it's basically the snake that eats itself.
Okay.
A continuous cycle, which, I mean, I guess in this cycle, it's a destructive cycle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a destructive cycle according to what the idea of Ouroboros is about. I had read this and I instantly loved this script. Not that it was short. It's like, I liked so many things about it. I was like, I need to make this. I want to make this. I don't want to I'm trying to figure out how to talk about it without going into too much detail.
Okay, that's fair.
But it is kind of a flip to a story that we hear all the time.
Okay.
It's a flip to the serial killer story. It's a flip to, we have millions and millions of stories. And I mean, not to bring the atmosphere down, but we always see these stories, especially for me as a woman. I always see these stories about women being kidnapped and held in basements, or women being kidnapped and tortured, or there's films like Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. There's films like Boxing Helena, and I mean, Boxing Helena is part horror, part drama most of the time, even though they sold it as drama. But the idea of all of a sudden having your arms and limbs amputated and being somebody's be living in some doctor's house in Boxing Helena, that's horrific to me. I don't care if they posted as a drama or it made sense for him to take off all her limbs. It was still scary. Or, there's films like, Split Personality one, where a dude has 15 personalities and he's keeping a girl in a basement. We have so many of those stories that it has become kind of a trope. It is a horror trope, and I wanted to offer a way to kind of flip that idea on its head. I wanted to open that up to a more, I guess, equal playing field.
Yeah.
And when I read the story, I absolutely love it. The screenwriter, I love his work. I loved everything he's ever written. Not ever written, but this was something I liked. I liked this person's work before, and I really wanted to bring it to life. It actually started as a gift to the screenwriter, and then it took on its own life because I was like, oh my God, I love this. I need to make a movie about it. I'll make a movie for you. And instead, it kind of took on its own life, and I was able to kind of get really wrapped into it. And I had a couple companies come through and offer their time to come and help. I had an amazing special effects person, Ben Gersh, and he was working on a team with somebody else. I had amazing cinematographer, director from a film company called Deathcom Studios.
Okay.
You know, they've done some other work. They've won a couple of awards. But this, I had worked with them before on a film prior called, I'm trying to remember what it is. I just looked at it today. It was a Western, it was a post-apocalyptic Western film. Mm-hmm. And we had worked before 5 years ago. And over the course of time, the work just got better. And also I want to give a shout out to the Creator Space for letting me film in it. And the film now has a special place in my heart because the person that helped us plan and get everything together recently passed 2 weeks ago. So it feels a lot more important. It feels a lot more special than when we had first started it. And it took on a life of its own. And I can't help but be thankful for everybody who was involved in the process of us getting this done. I know I had to thank the homies real quick, but I think it's in the nature of, it has a female villain of color. Mm-hmm. I play the female villain of color because I was just like, I can't let this pass. I cannot go through my life without being able to play a villain. Mm-hmm. I need to be in a horror movie. I majored in acting and then I took film and directing and all that later. And it had to become, it was a wish come true. It was a dream come true. I was, like we talked about, I'm raised on horror. Mm-hmm. I was meant to make horror films, like like I said, my grandparents met on Halloween, got married on Halloween. My parents met on Halloween. So without that spooky vibe or whatever, I wouldn't even exist.
Yeah.
Without the idea of scary and horror, I wouldn't exist whatsoever. So it was a dream come true to actually be able to go, okay, not only am I going to produce this thing, I'm going to get to do some monstrous things to people and feel wonderful about it. Nobody really talks about when you do get to play villains. I know a lot of actors talk about it, but when you do get to play villains, when in real life, I'm the type of person where I'm like, oh my God, there's a baby bird on the ground. I have to save it, or I'm the type of person where I'm at the soup kitchen, or I'm always the person where it's like, I try to do I'm always has the biggest heart. So it's kind of cool being like, okay, I'm going to kill everything in this room. And there's blood everywhere. It was a fun movie. It plays with a lot of concepts that I think we haven't really seen in horror, but the closest ones I can say it's the close to the Audition. And like I said, it's a mixture between the Audition and Saw. And I can't go too far into it or else I'm going to start giving things away. I feel in the end that some people might label this as a feminist horror movie because, there are feminist overtones in it, like the Audition did. But I think it's going to be, I think men are going to be able to see how it is when you're a woman watching horror. Mm-hmm. And that in order to get to the end of the film, the girl has to be virginal. She has to be all these things. And then there's no rhyme or reason why it happens. It's just, okay, this is what's happening to this person. And I feel like this is a film that it changes the role reversal and how in the places like women being more empowered as a villain. There are very few, if I don't know any, Black female villains in horror.
I was just trying to think of some off the top of my head, and the only one that pops on my head right away would be Lupita in Us, but she also plays the hero too, so that doesn't kind of cancel itself out. But that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. Is Lupita.
Yeah, there's no hero in this.
Yeah,
nobody's coming to save them. It is what it is, and that's the Ouroboros part. Like it's part of a cycle that this villain or killer keeps creating with these people. It's a never-ending cycle, and that's what the gruesome part about it is, that it's a never-ending cycle of destructiveness that could go on probably until the villain is dead, for decades, hundreds of years, it's not hundreds of years because, human lifestyle, but decades. This could go on forever and ever. And that's kind of the absolute scariest part about it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what I brought to the villain reminded me, like I brought a lot of real life serial killer things to the story. Like there is, I love serial killers. I am the Time Life book serial killer owning, watching everything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The Night Stalker, Dahmer. There was a serial killer in Los Angeles that had been operating for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a black serial killer because they could tell by the people he killed.
Okay.
And his style was he had a background in surgery. He had a background as a doctor. And he would cut open his women and put a bird inside of their chest.
Oh, wow.
And the bird would die out of them. And that's how they were finding these bodies. And he's been operating for almost 30, 40 years.
Still operating. Still.
They think that they caught him.
But they don't know.
But they don't know. Wow. There's people who are always going to come forth and say, I did it.
Yeah.
Because they're insane.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who are going to always, I never understood that, where people go, oh, wow, the sensationalism. I'll say I'm the killer. It was me. And, we think we have no proof that this killer, this is the guy who killed him, but that's who's standing trial, right?
Right. Interesting.
There's a lot of what I brought from the real world when it came to serial killers into this particular character.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to actually. Oh, sorry. Huh? Sorry, I was just going to actually ask you what horror movie villains inspired you with this character.
Let me think. I mean, of course, Jigsaw. Let me think. Well, I mean, it's the one killer is the one that we're going to be talking about later today. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say his name because I'm still terrified. I know it's not real. I know I'm an adult. But like out of the corner of my eye, I can see the mirror. And I'm just like, I don't want to say it. But,
I've been counting the amount of times I've said it for the podcast. So far, I've only said it once. So I'm going to have to say it one more time when we get more into the movie. And then I think we'll be good. I think that'll be it, right?
I'm gonna just say CM. After I say his name, I'm just gonna call him CM from now on, because and you know what? And that's the type of fear and terror that I aspire to have in these horror movies that I'm making. To have it be like, okay, I saw Candyman when I was like 9. It has been a very long time since I've been 9 years old, and I still kind of like walk by mirrors, and I'm like, let's not say that today,
What do you think it is about Tony Todd's character that really stands the test of time? Because it's one of the only like horror classic villains that's black that I can think of. I think, if not like outside of that's mainstream at least, that I think, because we always think of like Jason, we always think of like Freddy Krueger and stuff like that. But Candyman's always, I think we've got it 4 times now.
I didn't say it. You said it. That's you. That is all you. I did not say that, nor am I a party to that. I'm going to say it once, and I would say the villain that inspires me the most always in horror movies is Candyman, because it's the only one I'm afraid of. And like I said, I've been raised in the church of horror. There's very few things that scare me. I think it's I've even taken it to Faces of Death 1 through 7. I'm the type of person that, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but Rotten.com, I was there for that. I live in the land of, it's a little gruesome, it's a little morbid, it's a little creepy. I love that. I live in that. And Candyman is the only one. See, it's even hard not to say, y'all. I know you're listening out there. Cover the mirror. Try not to say it yourself. But the more you don't think about it, you're like, oh, can you read my thoughts? And you're like, wait, he's not real. Yeah. Wait, what if he is? What if I leave this thing and all of a sudden it's like, to the bed? I feel like not just as a black villain, he is a villain. He is the thing that, we're grown adults and we're sitting here trying to count how many times we said it.
Yeah.
He's one of those things that always scares you. It's people talk about Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger doesn't hold a candle.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Either.
Jason doesn't.
No.
It's there is no horror, there's no sarcasm, there's no minstrel show to him. Mm-hmm. It is an unrelenting, unforgiving killer.
Yeah. And not a brute either. That's what I really like about him. He's not a brute whatsoever. He's very eloquently spoken, very he's got this like nice demeanor to him, like as well as like he's polite is what he's even talked to his victim. And just like the way he like holds himself and dresses everything, which is very different than a lot of the killers we saw in like the classic horror films. They're either like really brutish or they try to be like a little too playful. Like if I'm thinking like Pennywise, So he's
Mhm.
this perfect
And
down
Freddie.
the middle.
Freddie's
And Freddie,
real
right?
playful.
It's very true. And Freddie too. He's this perfect down the middle of like a flawless perfection of like every single thing he does, like his voice, how he carries himself, his abilities within the movie are top notch as far as
Yeah, yeah. He never
horrifying,
stops. Yeah.
right? Like spiritually gaslighting too. Like he's a very interesting character that way.
Yeah. But I mean, in reality, all he wanted to do was have you keep your name out of his mouth.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
That's all he ever asked for. He was just like, just keep my name out your mouth.
Yeah, it's true.
So I mean, it is a perfect hood character from what was it? Cabrini Green is where it was set. I'm trying to remember where it was set, but it was set in the hood in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was set in the hood in Chicago. Perfect villain for that. Hey, all I want you to do is keep your name out my mouth. I keep my name out your mouth. And I love how that really, I mean, when you boil it down, that's all he really wanted. It was just like, yo, you running your mouth in these streets, I'm going to come find you. I'm going to get you. Keep your name out keep my name out your mouth. And that's the best thing ever. You know, that I was like, you know what? What's more perfect from a villain for a villain from the hood?
And what's really interesting about him too was the character Helen, the main character. I feel like she had maybe a billion chances not to go and look into the story further. Right? She just did so many things. Of you were in so much danger, but kept on. It worked for the movie, but she kept on pushing things to find out more throughout the film. Where I'm like, you are in way too much danger to be doing that. Like when she wanted to go to the projects to like kind of find out what was going on there, and then she went into the wall, like when she opened up the mirror to go on the wall, and her friend kept on saying, hey, you shouldn't do this, we shouldn't get out the car, we shouldn't do this, and she didn't listen to any of that. And then I'm like, well, you're kind of warned throughout the whole film not to keep looking into this.
I mean, that in of itself is like, you know, it has its own context to it because she is very much a white woman in America in that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm not, you know, downplaying any of the listeners that happen to be white women in America. But in the last, you know, couple months, I'm in Minneapolis right now. So racial tension is everywhere here. Mm-hmm. And in the last, you know, last couple of years, we've been introduced to the idea of like Karens and all these other things. That even brings up something in our society about privilege. Mm-hmm. What people think that, you know, certain people believe that they're privileged to do things despite the horror, despite, you know, being warned. They decide, you know, somebody who she saw herself as, even though she was in danger, I'm above that.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was a great story about privilege. Actually, watching it this time around, it really resonated to me that way. Because even when she goes into that bathroom to take pictures, and she gets kind of like jumped by that guy that's not the Candyman. But even then, when she's trying to reason with them, she really thought she was going to talk her way out of that. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Because if I myself got surrounded by those guys, I'm like, oh, well, there's no way I can just give them like she tried to scold them and she just really didn't think anything was going to happen to her. Throughout the whole film, I felt like that. She felt that nothing was going to happen to her because the amount of time she just crossed the line. I'm like, oh, you just came from such a position of privilege where you wouldn't think anything's going to happen to you. Meanwhile, her friend always thought something was going to happen to her. Like, she's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be going there. Gangs run this area. Don't do this. And yeah,
and that is definitely the view on what it's like being a person of color. Mm-hmm. You know, being a person of color, it's like we always have to think, okay, if I do this, what's going to happen? If I do this, what's going to happen? If I do that, there's always, you know, as a person of color, there's punishments for being brown in certain places, or being yellow in certain places, or being red in certain places. There are punishments for being of color in the wrong places, or taking too much privilege, or doing, you know, or going to the wrong place after dark, or we always have to be aware. And the nature of that friendship between the two women in that, it directly shows you what it's like in America, because one woman had to be like, oh, we shouldn't do this. Oh my God, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. And it wasn't that she was just trying to rain on the parade. It was like, no, bruh, this is dangerous. Yeah. You know, and the person with privilege, which I think at the end, she happened to be Candyman's granddaughter or something.
Yeah, well, there was a connection that she was kind of in the crowd of when Candyman originally got captured. She was kind of there.
I thought she was like his great granddaughter, because so they killed him because he got a white woman pregnant.
Yes. Oh yeah. Sorry, my mistake. Yeah.
No worries. I know way too much about horror.
Yeah.
But yeah, the white woman ends up being Candyman's granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that even in itself brings up a lot of there's a lot of politics in that.
Absolutely.
You know, not only is CM the perfect villain, it has an amazing social, political, and economic background. You know, there's very few horror movies that talk about racism.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few movies that aren't 12 Years a Slave that talks about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're just now getting those films, but at the time when that movie came out, nobody was talking about it like that.
No, not at all.
You know, we had roots. That's what we had.
Yeah.
And that's what we had. They expected us to live on for 40 years.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the first time really in horror that they were like, okay, slavery exists. Racism exists. The brutalization and murder of brown bodies exist. You know, oftentimes in horrors, like we watch, like, I think Interview of the Vampire was after that. And even then, when they brought up slavery, it was just like a biracial slave girl being like, why won't you come out to the slave quarters?
Yeah.
You know, instead of like, bruh, you're a rapist. Like, bruh, she's a slave. You don't love her. You're her rapist.
Yeah.
You know, and Candyman didn't, CM didn't pull any punches with that. You know, we open up into that film in his brutal murder at the hands of the white society at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they never really talk about what happened to the white woman he got pregnant.
Yeah. And the one thing I liked about Candyman too, especially for its time, was it wasn't apologetic. Like, it didn't need, even though the protagonist of the film is a white woman, it didn't really need like a white heroic person to be like, oh, not all white people are bad, which obviously I don't even have to go into it, but like, obviously that's not, obviously they're not. But at the same time, the way that it was done in this movie, it just said like he was killed for an instance of obviously blatant and horrific racism, but they didn't go like to do a savior, like a white savior sort of moment in the film, which I really liked about it, especially for the time.
Oh no, that's awesome. Like, that was the best thing about it. Like, mm-hmm. There isn't, you know, all of a sudden, you know, Michael Keaton doesn't show up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's like, I will save you.
Yeah.
You know, or it's, you know, all of a sudden there isn't Val Kilmer. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of the popular actors at the time, but that was like Val Kilmer, Michael Keaton, you know, George Clooney didn't show up all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And that was one of the best parts of that. You know, there was nobody coming to save you from this unrelenting, unforgiving monster. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and it's hard to feel like, oh, he's really a monster when his anger feels so justified. Yeah. You know, especially, you know, as a person sitting in Minneapolis where we just burnt this thing down because of racism. Mm-hmm. You know, and lots of people will say, oh, well, you know, you guys protested and all of that. But it's like coming from a place where I understand that rage. I understand that anger. I understand, not to that extent because it's horrific, mm-hmm. the brutality of racism. And, you know, we watched a racist murder happen, you know, 20 blocks from me. You know, we all watched that horrific thing. And it's not too far from what happened to CM in the movie. You know, we watched, the movie is a Black man is tortured to death because he made a decision to go in not the wrong place, but, you know, he just was in the wrong place. Right. And supposedly, they decided to trial him as a judge and jury. So his anger when I was a kid wasn't completely understandable. But now as an adult and getting through the riots in Minneapolis and being in Minneapolis, which, as much as people want to say they don't imagine this place being racist, I've been here for a while, and I'm not from here. Okay. You know, I'm a transplant, and the racism may not be as blatant, but it is still just as horrific and destructive. Where did you originally come from before you got to Minneapolis? I've been everywhere. I started in Ohio, and then Arizona, then California, California a couple times. Then Colorado, there's some Europe in between that. Of course, Ohio still. Yeah, so I was living a bunch of different places, but before I came here directly from Arizona.
Okay.
Well, Arizona / Cali. I was living in between both at the time. So I'm going to say Arizona because that's where my ID is from.
Okay.
And his anger, now that I've been here, it feels so justified. It feels so very justified that something that horrific would create a poltergeist or just some kind of evil vacuum. Just because the horrific nature of it, there is no good in racism. There is no explaining racism. It is an unrelenting evil that has been haunting Black Americans since we were brought to these shores. Is an unrelenting evil that pops up whenever you get pulled over, or you go into the store, or you talk to your children, or when Black men have to have both talks. You guys get two talks. What to do when the police pull you over, and the birds and the bees. That's something that is unrelenting when you have to go and tell your children about that. Like, hey, just in case there's these monsters, there's these people that everybody thinks is nice that may kill you because you ran a stop sign. I felt that CM was very representative of the kind of unrelenting horrors and lasting horrors of racism when it comes to brown bodies in America.
Do you think that the reboot, well, it's kind of like a spiritual sequel, do you think that it's going to double down on that, or do you think that they're going to try to lighten that up? What do you think about that?
I'm still trying to figure out what exactly is spiritual sequel.
Yeah, I'm really tough. I think what they're trying to do, and from my understanding, is that they're going to ignore the Candyman 2 and 3 and just go from Candyman, this one, and the 1992 to the new one that's coming out. That's where I kind of connected. And the baby that was in Candyman is going to be
the new one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I knew that part, but I still don't know what spiritual sequel means.
Yeah, I think it just negates what happened for 2 and 3. That's what I think it means, but yeah.
I mean, Farewell to the Flesh was interesting. Still not the best version, but Farewell to the Flesh wasn't bad. Not the greatest version, but it was still good. I guess I'll have to watch to see what spiritual sequel means.
Yeah.
I mean, it could just be really good buzzwords because, it's 2021. Like, we are masters of marketing now.
Absolutely.
It could be great buzzwords, or it could really truly be a spiritual sequel. And once we see it, I'll know exactly what that means. I mean, maybe they mean that he's going to possess the baby, but we knew that from the first one.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, okay, this is the sequel. We see the sequel. It was the baby.
Yeah.
We saw that. I want to see it so I can at least figure out what spiritual sequel means.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what it's going to look like from because it's now got like Black directors, right? Like Black screenwriters, and from that perspective, I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like for the film, especially in the climate we're in now. I think it can turn out really well, but my only concern would be that it may just go like kind of a PG kind of route, which is my concern about any modern horror film, is that they just try to go lighter just so we can just so they can sell it more realistically, so it can get across more boundaries. And I hope it just keeps the overall like gore and aspect of that way, but also amplifies the social aspect of the story, what I hope happens. But we'll see. Yeah.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see. I will definitely be there when it's released.
Oh yeah, me too.
I gotta know. I mean, I wonder if I'm gonna be frightened. I don't know if it's gonna have the same lasting effects as the original. I don't think anything can really top the original because it was something that we had just never seen before.
Yeah.
Nobody was expecting it, and he came out of nowhere. Like, not to like say like, oh yeah, no, he came out of nowhere. Nobody was expecting that character. Nobody asked for CM, but I'm so glad that it happened. And I remember the night that I watched it, right? I was at my grandmother's house, and my grandmother, so the basement in our house had mirrors all over the walls. But that was also where my grandmother kept the ice cream in the deep freeze. So I remember her being like, "Oh, baby, why don't you go get me some ice cream?" As we're watching it. And I just remember putting my foot on that first stair, and I was just like, "Oh my God." I just remember like, don't think it, don't say it. I have never ran so fast in my entire life since that night, where I remember just like being downstairs, grabbing it and just being like, ah, and in my mind, I could feel the hook. I could feel the voice. I could feel all of it kind of like running behind me, even though I had been in that basement for maybe 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But it was like watching it and then all the mirrors. I don't know if she did it on purpose. She was watching the movie too. I don't know if she did it on purpose or if she just really wanted that ice cream.
That's got to be the longest 20 seconds of your life too. It was just like running down there, running back.
Especially when you're a kid.
Oh yeah.
When you're a kid, everything might kill you.
Oh, for sure.
You're small and they're small and you worry about the monsters under the bed. You don't realize that they live outside.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're small and you don't know, you can't do anything yet really. And you're like, oh, I'm dead. He's got me.
And Candyman was such a visceral killer. Like the hook is such a scary weapon, and just his use of it too, and just his ability to just appear and how he used it was so horrifying. Like it just added to him as a monster.
And then that voice, the voice.
Yes. The voice and just the way he like delivered everything was just so well done. Another thing that I think that the sequel can't really, or the spiritual sequel can't compete with is the use of real bees. How they use the real bees in this movie is just, you can't touch that. CGI bees will do one thing, but like a real, like see the real bees, like Tony Todd's face and on his mouth is, you can't touch that.
And he really got stung. Like he got paid every time he got stung.
Yeah.
So he walked away with more money than he even imagined for taking on that role.
Yeah.
But he put the effort in. He's still one of the most perfect villains ever made.
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of genre.
I'm trying to think that is there a better villain? Not even in the genre of being a Black villain. He transcends that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We think of Leatherface, we think of Jason. But when it came to Tony Todd's character, he is the perfect villain.
Yeah. Did you hear originally that was going to go to Eddie Murphy? But there was a height discrepancy?
Oh, yeah.
Sure, Eddie Murphy, because it was like Eddie Murphy was 5'9" and Tony Todd's 6'5". So that's why they're like, no.
5'9" is not scary. Sorry.
No.
I mean, it might be.
Tony Todd was 5'9".
I don't want to knock anybody who's like 5. I don't want to knock any dude that's like 5'9" or 5'10", but 6'5", a looming monster.
Oh yeah, and that long jacket he had on, just like that's the best jacket, best dress villain of all time too. Like his whole outfit's amazing. Like, that jacket's amazing. And
with the little fur. Oh yeah, like he's the best dressed villain, and I think, in my opinion, as an actual villain, he might be the best villain. Yeah. Yeah. Because he's elegant. Yeah. He's powerful. He's not a brainless, mindless. He is smart. He is cunning. He is clever. He, the powers that he has, like he is definitely he is sent from hell. Yeah. Maybe Pinhead. You know what? I would say that he's in the same category as Pinhead. That's fair. He's easily top tier for like ever too. Like it's because his abilities, like you're saying, are just you can't really mess with those. And then on top of his abilities that he has, the hook too. So it's like he's got everything. He really does have everything. And you can't really outrun him is another thing too. Like we really saw that. Like anytime you just kind of appears wherever you are too. I mean, as long as there's a mirror. Yeah. And we live in a world filled with mirrors. Oh yeah. If you're running down the street and there's cars, there's mirrors in the car. Absolutely. There's actually a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure episode about a villain that moves through mirrors. I felt like, okay, yeah, it actually really is kind of a frightening idea, because anything that casts a reflection, you could walk by a store, the mall. There's lots of you can't we live in a culture where people love to see themselves. Oh yeah. And I think that movie, because he moves through that mirror world, works as a perfect reflection for the world that we live in. Even our phones are reflections, right? So even doesn't matter. We always have some sort of reflection on us. So yeah. Even our phones, you can, I can pick up my phone right now and be like, hey, really sweet.
Yeah.
you know.
And then he would blind you.
Yeah. You know, and that was the aspect, like he moved through the reflections and there was never a way to really escape that.
And I think that, and another thing I think that like really worked for the movie is that, and I wrote this down in my notes here, that he doesn't appear till like the 44th minute of the movie. So he's like, doesn't appear to like distance into the movie, right? Which is, you're just sitting there waiting for, like, they build up the story in such a way, but you're just like sitting here waiting for him to appear. And then when he first does, you're like, oh, that's terrifying. His like first appearance and his voice and everything, I'm like, okay, well, that's an unbeatable villain.
Yes. Yeah. He's unbeatable.
Yeah.
You know, there was really no way, you know, and I mean, at the end of Candyman, she didn't win. Like,
no, she flat out
there's
lost.
no winning.
Yeah.
You know, just like with Pinhead and Hellraiser, there is no winning.
Mm-mm.
There's merely hoping that like they never find you again.
Yeah. That's what
There's merely hoping you never end up anywhere near that situation again.
Yeah, and I like that. I like there's a lot of modern horror films that are starting to do it again, but I like bleak horror films that like end sort of with there wasn't really a chance of them winning, but you just kind of, because I feel like the setup of that. I always feel like when I watch a lot of horror movies, like, oh, well, let's see how they're gonna win. But when the hero doesn't win, I'm like, oh, that's even scarier. And there's a lot of more modern horror films I've seen to be doing lately. I don't want to say them because it'd be spoilers, but yeah, and I like that setup. I like the setup of the hero not winning all the time because I think it just adds to the fear of it.
Yes, it makes it. It's more frightening to know that like there's no way to beat that.
Mm-hmm.
You just hope that you get away. You just hope that like you can get away somehow. But that's one of those things that you can never really get away from.
No, and as the audience, I think it adds like to more fear of the villain themselves, right? Because as an audience watching, you can like weigh out in your mind, like, oh, I would have done this differently. But if you see them like lose, you're like, oh well.
No, there's no scene like that in you know, besides being like, no, don't go in there, bitch. No. You know, besides the usual, what are you doing? Stop.
There's a lot of those in this movie where I'm like, I was just feeling like, why would you come? Stop, don't go through there. The bathroom one was the one for me.
There's definitely a lot of scenes of run, bitch, run.
The bathroom was the one for me when she went in the bathroom and she was like taking the pictures of like where that one kid had gotten killed. When she was like covering her mouth and the smell of there, all I could think about is how disgusting that place would have smelled. And then when she gets cornered by those gang members in there, I'm like, well, this is your worst case scenario. Like that's just your worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm. But you know, once again, it's kind of like the audacity to just walk up in there and think that like, oh, I could just be here.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like anybody else would like, well, there's a bunch of dead, you know, somebody just died here. I don't have any police. I know that this is a dangerous neighborhood. It's not like what was it? It was the Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
Cabrini Green. Cabrini Green is dangerous in real life. The funniest part about that is that's where R. Kelly used to go hunting.
Whoa. I didn't know that.
Like R. Kelly went to Cabrini Green High School.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Well, that makes it a little interesting that like they shot CM there because it's like, well, I guess there was somebody in here taking people down.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's where R. Kelly would hunt.
Yikes.
He went to that high school. So it's a little weird thinking about it now in this like frame of mind where I'm like, well, I guess they did have a monster in there.
Yeah, that really changed. Around the same time. No, I guess it was a little later for R. Kelly.
No. R. Kelly's like in his 50s, so it would have been perfect. It would have been right on time.
That's true.
Like, and you know what? When he graduated, he never stopped hunting.
No.
He always kept going back. All his victims were from the Cabrini Green High School.
Yikes.
So R. Kelly never stopped hunting in that neighborhood ever.
R. Kelly was the Candyman.
He was the kid villain.
He was flat out. Yeah.
He was flat out the villain because that's where he would hunt.
Yeah.
And we got to use the word hunting because that's what he did.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So that makes, you know, now we're sitting here in 2021 and it's just like, man, all of the aspects of that story and all the interesting parts of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you know, overall, just the thought of it's a story about privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story about the brutality of racism in America and its lasting indelible marks on us.
Mm-hmm.
Not only as brown people, but as, you know, people, just America as a whole. We're still dealing with the indelible marks of racism and slavery and prejudice in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was ahead of its time. And, you know, it's 2021 and that movie was made almost 30 years ago. Probably, yes, it's been 30 years.
Yeah.
And the concepts and the issues in it still haven't left us.
No. And it's one of those things that when I rewatched it now, I'm like, I was kind of not shocked, but still a little stunned that like how relevant it is now. Like it kind of blew me away that way. There was so much about them. Like, oh, I hope the remake, and I think the spiritual sequel, I think they're gonna do a good job on touching up on a lot of the things that happened. But yeah, it was a very interesting watch this time around with everything that's happened. One thing I did want to circle back to and ask you about was because living in Minneapolis right now, when you first got there, as opposed to this past year, how do you feel? Has there been a change, or has it always just been? Have you felt like the racial tension's always been this way, but it's just been amplified from obviously the perfect things that happened in the past year?
I think it has always been this way, and it was amplified because now we have cameras.
It's more or less,
you know, when I got here, it was always it felt like the beginning of a horror movie. I'm going to be real. You know, I got here and it was like people of color would talk to white people like this, you know, staring down at their feet. And I'm like, what is wrong with y'all? Because I'm the type of person, I look you in the eye. I don't care if you're the president. Yeah. I don't care if you are, you know, I don't care if you are the return of Jesus Christ. I don't care. That's not like, you're no better than me. Yeah. But you could tell with the atmosphere and the way that Black people reacted to white people around them. And even some of the things that happened to me as a Black woman of color in Minneapolis. It was going from, I lived in places where I'd never felt so dehumanized as I lived in the South, and it wasn't as weird as it was here.
Interesting.
Like, the one thing about this place is I've had people just invite themselves to touch me, kiss me, to grab my chest. Like, they treat you in such a way that you're not human.
Right.
And it would be this like, oh, you say something about it and you would ruin the passive aggressive nature of what was happening.
Right.
So it was like before we had all these cameras and somebody actually caught it, it was a quiet horror. Because I would be like, oh my God, this guy just came up to me and stuck his tongue down my throat out of nowhere. And things like that would happen to me. I remember like somebody was like, well, where were you wearing? And I was like, I was at work. I was wearing a suit. Yeah. You know, or men and women come up and they'll just grab you here. They'll just, and if you saying it's like, well, what are you going to tell about it?
Interesting. And since obviously the unfortunate death or murder of George Floyd, have you felt that, has there been a change to how everything is, or how has it changed there?
There has been a change just because now it's out in the open and now we're having more conversations about race and what are Black people feeling here. And, you know, before George Floyd's death, I would talk to my partner and my friends who weren't of color, and they would say, you're just imagining the racism here. Oh, you're just being dramatic. She's just being dramatic. You know, it's not that racist here. And it'd be it would be people of non-melanated people.
Right.
Saying, oh, you're just making it up. You're just imagining it. It's just in your head. It's not really that bad here. You're not seeing that. And it was just being gaslit the whole time about what was actually really happening to me and other people of color here. And I feel like the murder of George Floyd and getting that caught on camera, it was the first time we were able to go, to see what has been happening to us. Yeah. I'm going to put it like this. Being in Minneapolis before the George Floyd murder was like screaming with a pillow over your face. And nobody's going to help. It was like screaming into the void about all these things that were happening to me and happening to other people of color, and nobody was going to help you. And that was kind of that's also part of the horror that I brought into playing the villain in Ouroboros. That as much as you scream, as much as you cry, as much as you beg for this to stop, nobody's going to hear you and nobody's going to help you. And up until the murder of George Floyd, I'm going to be, we're going to get real about it. I fell into a deep depression because I couldn't talk about it. I felt it like always relenting. I became scared to drive. Every time I saw a cop car, even before George Floyd, I would just be like, please don't stop me. Please don't stop me. Please don't stop me. And I never had that feeling before. You know, I lived in Arizona, I lived in California, and Minneapolis was a unique feeling of a unrelenting horror that you couldn't tell anybody about because nobody would believe you that it was happening. You know, and that was something that I could bring into the villain of Ouroboros.
Did that performance feel like cathartic to you then? Like just on top of that, actually, I have a two-part question. Did that performance feel cathartic to you? And also did watching horror as a genre feel cathartic to you during this time, or was it jarring to?
I've never stopped watching horror ever. There's never been a point in my life where no matter what's happening that I've stopped watching horror.
Yeah.
And playing that character, the playing the character definitely feels cathartic. I mean, when people see the movie, they're going to understand how cathartic it really is.
Yeah.
But it definitely felt cathartic on multiple levels because not only is there feminist overtones and racial overtones just because of the nature of who I am, because being a Black woman in America, I am the mixture of the person that has to deal with the feminist overtones, I live at the intersection of race and gender. So that is a lot. There's, you know, I didn't want to make that the focus of that, but I realized because me playing a villain, you know, as a woman of color, it automatically is involved in that.
Right.
You know, there's no way to really escape that. Just like there's no way to escape the villain in this film, and there was no way to escape Candyman, and there was no way, you know, we have not still escaped the horrors of racism that were shown in movies like Candyman and these that happened to us in reality for the last 400 years, you know, and the riots in Minneapolis felt like it just felt like I had written something in a story. You know, all of a sudden I was just like, the cavalry showed up and it was like this impossible feeling of like, wow. And then I realized that because I was out there fighting and, you know, and incensed against this villain, that I was the cavalry. So it had a lot of feelings. It had a lot of, you know, there's a lot of feelings. There's a lot of emotional charge in it. But yeah, it felt a little bit like I can breathe now.
On the same topic, I have another question because I'm really very, very much interested in this. What do you think because I myself, I'm in Canada. What do you think that people in the media, as well as people outside of Minneapolis, are got wrong about how the situation down there was portrayed? Like, what do you think was spun wrong or spoken about wrong and has still not been corrected? Like, I'm just curious about that.
That we were just a pack of wild animals burning things down at will. You know, it was that we were just a pack of like an insane, crazed mob that was destroying the fabric of America. You know, and it like, say, for instance, it wasn't just that, right? I lived about 2 blocks from the precinct that burned down. And let's say, for instance, I would go to the library that was right across from the precinct. And every day, this white police officer would hit on me in the most uncomfortable way, and I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
You know, because he would hit on me with his hand on his gun. Yes. You know, and every day I would sit and I remember, I know this sounds horrible, but right before it happened, I remember one day he had did it and I was like, okay, I'm never going to the library again. And I remember wishing, I was like, I hope that precinct burns down and he has no job. You know, and it was like, and I'm not trying to say that, but it was like, you know, they want to say that we were wild and crazy and that's why the precinct burned down. But I'm a person that had somebody who would go to that precinct and hit on me every day with a gun in his pocket. So I couldn't say anything. You know, I had to be like, oh, I have a boyfriend. And then he'd be like, well, we can fix that with his gun on his, with his hand on his gun.
Right.
You know, and it's these quiet little horrors that eventually made us, it was like fighting a giant monster. It was like fighting, you know, it was like fighting a kraken. It was like fighting a giant monster that had been looming in our heads and over us since I've only lived here a few years, but it was instant, like watching it burn. It was just like,
yeah.
You know, it's they want to make it seem like we were just burning things down and we have no respect for anything, but it's just like the story I just told you. I couldn't go read a book.
Mm-hmm. Well, from what it sounds like, and to tie it back to everything here, it just feels like you're living in a horror movie. Like
It just felt like I was living in a horror movie, and I had a partner, have a partner and a relationship with somebody who was not of color.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to tell them that this was happening to me, but everything around them and everybody around them had just accepted that this was life. It was people, and even when they started to accept it, he asked somebody else and they told him, oh, she's just making it up. And I'm one person versus living in a society that tells you that it's not happening. It's easier to say, oh, she's crazy, she's depressed, she's making it up, she wants attention, because then you won't have to face the fact that you've been living in, basically, you haven't been noticing the secret horror, the silent horrors that have been happening to the people around you. It was like living in a horror movie. It was definitely a little bit like, as a brown person, you couldn't, it took me a second to realize that I couldn't say, hey, you're making me uncomfortable, to the police officer that would hit on me with his hand on his gun.
Right.
And then threatened to kill the person I was dating to fix that solution.
Yeah, that's absolutely horrible.
And before that horrible. Precinct burnt down, I remember that month, I would wake up in the middle of the night with this feeling that I gotta move. I have to get out of here. Something is happening. Something's looming. 2 days before I moved out of that neighborhood, I was like, I gotta go now. Grabbed my stuff and went.
Yeah.
Because a friend had called me and she was like, oh, I got this place. And I was like, I gotta go. And this is before George, this was, I guess George Floyd got shot on the 26th. I had moved out of that neighborhood on the 24th.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 days later, that precinct that I had wished had caught on fire and that cop that I wish would go with it were gone.
Wow. And
the media wanted to paint us like we were these monsters, not the fact that, I'm sure I'm not the only Black woman of color that had to deal with a cop with a gun on his hand, with his hand on his gun, talking about, hey, you want to go out?
Yeah.
I'm not the only person who was dealing with stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was so bold, but also hidden at the same time, because Minneapolis is still very segregated.
Interesting.
It is still very segregated, whether they definitely are progressive in a lot of ways. I'm not going to say that the whole place it was monstrous, because it's gotten a lot better since it got set on fire.
Right.
But there was a separation. The Black people lived on one side of town and the white people lived on the other side of town. And I was the person that moved in between both. I moved in between both worlds, but it was hard to being like, this is what's happening in this Black world. Mm-hmm. And then trying to tell it to these white people who have been so ingrained in not talking about feelings or what's really happening in this passive aggressive nature, that it just felt, I was like, all these people, Black people in Minneapolis are only 3%. There's only 3% Black people here.
Yeah.
But we are getting killed at a rate of 40%, 50%, 80%. It's an insane amount of killing for this little bit of people. And then it didn't take me long to realize that it was like living in a horror movie.
Absolutely. Two more questions here. Do you believe that, because we've kind of talked about this, the social aspect of what's going on in horror, where we're seeing a lot more stories from people of color, from Black filmmakers, as well as a lot of the videos that are being shot with people's phones that are that aren't mainstream media, and we're able to see stories like George Floyd's through people's phones. Do you believe a combination of those two stories are really getting more of the Black experience out in a way that the media is trying to kind of fight against?
Well, of course, they want a controlled view of the Black experience.
Mm-hmm.
They've always wanted a controlled view. I love me some ghetto hip hop. I love me some gangster rap. I love me some NWA. I was a kid that was definitely raised in the hood. Mm-hmm. No matter how I sound, I'm from the hood, y'all. I am from the hood. It's like, what it say? Donald Glover doesn't know why he doesn't have an accent, and neither do I. I just don't know why I don't have the hood accent at all. And I have hood cousins. It's like, it is what it is. I'm from the hood, y'all. So never forget that part. It has to happen that way. They want the controlled media. I love Lil Wayne, but we can't say that certain aspects of his music didn't seem like it came as a control system. If we tell people, oh, become a drug dealer because that's the heroes that they gave us, well, that keeps a lot of Black doctors from happening. That keeps a lot of Black lawyers from happening. That keeps a lot of Black scientists. That keeps them out of country clubs. That keeps us out of these areas that, they want to control us out of. Because if you're busy, it's like the fairy tale of Black crime. It's the fairy tale of Black on Black crime.
Yeah.
Black on Black crime does not exist. It doesn't. What exists is crimes of proximity. If you put all one color of people into one neighborhood, well, who are they going to commit crimes against? Nobody's going to go walk all the way to the white neighborhood that's, 17 blocks away, across town, 3 buses to go and rob Karen, go and steal their Shih Tzu. It's back to the fantasy and fairy tale of Black on Black crime that they've created, because it doesn't exist. There are crimes of proximity, and that's what it is. Like, we don't say, well, all white men are rapists, but we can say all Black men are thugs, which, that's a portrait that the media has created. But if you look at the numbers of the people who commit the most rapes, they are not people of color, and they're in these higher white, upper middle class neighborhoods a lot of the time. They even paint the idea that it's the poor white men, but it's really not. It's the people who can get away with that. It is this media portrait that they paint in order to keep people in these boxes, so they never get to leave those boxes. And then there'll be people who believe what the media says, that'll be like, oh, I have to keep these people there because they're a danger to me because the person on TV said it. It's the same way in which we see, even if a person of color was the one killed or tortured or whatever, we still get the picture of them committing a crime or doing drugs.
Yeah.
We didn't get the picture of rest in peace. Like, we didn't get the picture of what's his name, Martin, of him in space camp.
Yeah.
We got one of him on the internet being a 17-year-old in 2019 or 2018 or whenever he passed, doing what 28-year-olds, not 28-year-olds, doing what 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds do on social media.
Yeah, and you see stories of a white man, for instance, would kill his whole family, and they just post a family picture. And it's
and you're like, but really, why though?
Yeah, there's actually a story happening in Calgary. I can't remember who the man was, but by accident, the Calgary News was talking about families in general, and they used the stock photo they used was of a guy that famously killed his entire family, and they just didn't know, because oh, it's just a stock photo. And everyone's like, you should probably look at your stock photo you use, because that's how often those stories sort of happen. They didn't even know they were posting a guy that murdered his family, because they're just like, oh, it's a nice family stock photo.
Oh yeah, the Peterson.
Yeah.
That kid murdered his whole family and 2 kids and his pregnant wife.
Yeah.
For and his mistress. I watched that. My one of my roommates, she watches a lot of that, and she got me into that story where I didn't even know what happened. But then I saw that, and it's like, and I remember seeing that, and I'm like, but
yeah.
Like, but that's somebody who murdered children. He murdered children, and even good stories about people of color, they use pictures of, they use the worst picture ever on their worst day.
Oh yeah. Or even a story of a guy that I can't remember what the specific story was, but this man was, it labeled him as ex-con saves this woman's life, and it's like he wasn't that's just not relevant. His criminal background had nothing to do with anything.
It's like, why can't you just say this man saved this woman, not ex-con?
Yeah.
They don't bring up the history of other people, but they do it for marginalized people. So the media definitely has a story they want to tell, because you got to look at who controls the media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rupert Murdoch owns a lot of things. Viacom, BT, all these things, most of these things, even if they have Black vice presidents or presidents to it, are still owned by white men. There's still an agenda that even if you see Black faces at the board table, which isn't too many, right? They're still serving an agenda.
Sure.
They're still serving an agenda no matter what. So now with the things like the onset of the internet and our cell phones and the ability to shoot whole movies on our iPhones, all that.
Yeah.
And also being able to capture these real life horrors that are happening, it has changed the game for what horror is, because now we have a real everybody has a real understanding of what is actually horrific.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Freddie isn't real. But the cop that was hitting on me that, could see me walk down the street from my house, he was real.
Yeah.
It hit a point where I would pick different ways home just in case he followed me. Because I knew that if he decided whatever he decided, there's no way I could fight against that.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what I do, there's no battle I could win in that situation. And that was a lot of what it was like in Minneapolis before the riots. It was this dehumanizing. People felt like they could touch me when they want to. It was the talking to my friends and partners who were not of color
mm-hmm. and
being told that it wasn't real, and then the cop and all of that. I'm going to be real. It put me into a very deep depression, that I'm just not climbing my way out of. But part of climbing my way out of it was producing and acting in this film, Ouroboros.
Mm-hmm.
The script itself was not written by a person of color. But I felt like as a person of color, it kind of described a lot of the things that I was feeling, but not as the villain, but as the victim. And it felt very cathartic. And it felt like, okay, these people, in your mind, you want to tell them that, there's good apples. No, these people were enjoying what they're doing. There is a maliciousness to them. There is a power feeling to being able to do that to someone and knowing that they can't do anything back. It was a definite understanding of, okay, these people, these are remorseless monsters that have gotten used to the rush of power. And being in the victim situation, it put a greater understanding where when you begin to feel some kind of empathy, you're like, oh, well, it's just some bad apples in the system. Then you start, being in the villain role of that and seeing the situation where these helpless people can't do anything against the force that I am.
Mm-hmm.
You start to understand that there is no empathy for that. It is part of a giant, unrelenting monster. It is the overall dread that you cannot escape. And that's what it was like until we decided to come out and protest.
Have you felt like there's been a big change since then? Like, or has it just been a minor change, but that minor change has been enough for right now?
I think the people who aren't acknowledging racism see it all the time.
Mm.
Not see it all the time. They're more like, hey, that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
They think about the things that they do more. They analyze what is going on. Even they've begun to explore their own racism within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They begin to find that, it's not so much the older generation, but it's like millennials and up. I'm assuming that you're a millennial and
millennial.
I'm assuming that you're not up, but like, it's like millennials and back.
Right.
So millennials, Gen Z, we, and a little bit of Gen X is getting it, but we're the ones that are really analyzing and questioning our own inner racisms, our own prejudice, all of that. The older generation here is not so much. They're still in very much denial about it.
Right.
But I mean, at the same time, even while we're on trial, while we're watching the trial, to the trial of Derek Chauvin, they still killed another Black man.
Yeah.
A Black child.
Yeah. It was right during the trial, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yep. It was right in the middle of the trial. So while we are definitely examining the racism here,
mm-hmm.
it is nowhere near fixed. This is, the conviction of Derek Chauvin is merely a Band-Aid
mm-hmm. on
a huge gaping wound that is not closing anytime soon. But from what I watched here in Minneapolis, from me and other millennials and the younger generations, like I walked out there and there was 16 and 17-year-olds kicking over those cars. It was 18-year-olds that were like, I'm burning this place down.
Mm-hmm.
It was their rage fueled so much of that because they're a generation that's not taking it anymore. They're not. Mm-hmm. And they've watched it. They're watching it. They're still experiencing it. It's their classmates that are getting killed. One of the people who were shot was a teacher from the high school.
Yikes.
That was known for taking care of his students.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are helping them are getting shot. Their friends are the ones that are in the most danger. And they're the ones that came the quickest to the call. You know, and we wanted, in like we talked about before, the media wanted to paint us all as these monsters, but in reality, we were the people who were fighting this monster that had been like killing so many of us, but we couldn't prove it. Like, I couldn't prove what was happening to me because a lot of the times people would say, you know, call me the N-word when I was alone.
Yeah.
Or, you know, when that cop would, you know, do what he did, I would be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Or the people who came up and decided they were going to molest me as a Black woman in Minneapolis because they knew I couldn't say anything, I was alone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's the greatest strength to this kind of racism, is they find you when you're alone.
Yeah.
The other were too strong, but cowards find you alone.
Yeah.
You know,
which just kind of ties into this movie, right? That's what happened to Candyman, like, you know, like in different aspects, but that's sort of what happened in the aspect of Candyman. He was alone when he was attacked. And I feel like that's like a very historical look at it, as well as a very still modern thing, is that, like you said, like, it's a cowardly thing to do. And usually, no, always racism comes from like a cowardice. It comes from
a cowardly place.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from a place of fear. It comes from a cowardly place. It comes from a place of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and while Minneapolis is changing, we are still far away from this raceless society that, you know, some of our government officials have recently said that America was not racist, but that's because they live, I'm not going to say who, but that's because they live in a very white-walled, protected area of money and privilege that is so far away from the experience of, you know, Black women like me that have to that were walking to the library, minding their business, or at a job, and people would walk up and decide that I was, you know, that I was not human enough to worry about whether they'd like attack me or molest me. You know, and that was the experience in Minneapolis. Like, I will tell you the truth, it felt like I was living in an actual horror movie, but not the kind where, you know, I got to turn off the TV or I got to turn off Netflix and go watch, you know, Jujutsu Kaisen or whatever, or anime, or all of a sudden start watching like Demon Slayer. I just couldn't escape it. You know, and at a certain point, you know, I was dating a non-melanated person, and and it even would come to blows within friend circles. You know, like, I've had friends that were my friends that even said, oh, the racism isn't real. And those same friends I saw at the Black Lives Matter marches when we almost died this summer. So it was just like, oh, it's real enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it made it real for people who didn't want to believe it or see that it existed. And the watching the buildings on fire, watching the chants, watching all of that, it was the most cathartic feeling in the world. It felt like the world may not understand what happened, but I understood what happened, and it felt like freeing myself. It felt like we freed ourselves to a certain extent, even if it was ugly and there was rage. And, you know, I do feel bad about the people who weren't involved, whose businesses got burned. You know, I feel like I am still, you know, I don't feel like all of it was, you know, I feel like we did what we did, but not everybody, the casualties, I still feel bad about some of the casualties.
Absolutely.
But Minneapolis has a history that, when I started looking into the real history of Minneapolis, it's a little bit even more horrific when it came to race than I thought it was. You know, they ran a eugenics program here.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, they ran a whole eugenics program here in Minneapolis. So that started to feed in more about like, okay, this racism is a little bit more than just like, oh, we don't like Black people. It's like they ran a whole eugenics program here, which was partnered with the U of M, University of Minnesota, and Dow. They make plastics.
Okay.
You know, and that was sponsored through here. So it's like the history and the feeling of being here was definitely out of a horror movie. But unlike, you know, movies where it's the bleak, unrelenting horror, I thought it was going to be the bleak, unrelenting horror. And then the cavalry came and it just happened to be me and everybody else who had been feeling this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot to pull from as an actor and as a producer when it came to this film.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't know if the writer felt like it was that deep, I think he's just trying to write a story because he's, the person who wrote it is not of color.
Right.
I think he was just trying to tell a story, but when I read it, it resonated with me as something deeper than just a horror story, than just a scary story.
I think that kind of relates to exactly the same way as Candyman, right? Because Candyman wasn't written wasn't written or directed by a Black person, but Tony Todd's portrayal really got that vision out of the racism behind it, as well as all the Black actors' portrayal in the film. Actually, I thought about how they even looked at the projects were in Chicago where it took place. I thought it was a very interesting look at both races of the time. But Candyman himself, because I think a lot of people look back at the Candyman story that aren't Black, I think they just see it as like, oh, there was this horror movie villain that just happened to be Black. When you really look at the movie again,
it's ingrained. He had to be Black in order for it to happen.
Absolutely.
And I mean, and at that time period, we had the Watts riots. Mm-hmm. There was Rodney King. Mm-hmm. And we keep watching. That was the first murder that we had seen of a Black man on camera. Mm-hmm. That was the very first one. And I feel like, because that was around the time of Candyman and all that, I feel like that all feeds into each other. And just like the film Ouroboros. So let me stop and say, the fact that you see any overlapping between Ouroboros and Candyman means that I am honored. I am not worthy of such a title. I am not worthy of that amazing distinction. Because it's, let me just bring that out there. The fact that the film I produce is being anywhere compared or overlapping or dissected next to Candyman, thank you. It's like,
well, I'm excited.
It's like the universe answered my prayers. Yeah, I'd say put that out there like, oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, back to normal now.
Yeah. Well, we should probably just wrap up here. Before I let you go, though, what are you watching now? Because I like to ask people what horror movies they're watching now. What are you excited for that's coming out next?
I am an anime horror girl right now.
Okay.
So, I mean, rewatching Demon Slayer. I mean, people don't see I see Demon Slayer as horror because there's demons and monsters and monstrous things happening in it. Currently right now, Demon Slayer.
Yeah.
Let's go watch that at the theater.
You got theaters? We still don't have theaters here. We're still waiting. Yeah. I'm so jealous.
I have been watching a lot of Korean horror.
Oh, amazing.
Like The Kingdom.
Yeah.
There's The Kingdom. There is Ravage, I think.
Ravager, I think it's called, right?
Ravager. There's a Kingdom. There's one called Home Sweet Home about people just turning into demons.
Love that show. I've written.
Oh, so good. I binge watched it in 2 days, and I was so mad at myself because I was like, well, now I got nothing to watch.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Did you watch The Call, by the way?
Huh?
Did you watch The Call?
Not yet, but I will.
Last year, I could not recommend it more. But make sure when you watch it, and when I wrote my article, I said this too, make sure when you watch it, to watch right until the credits. Because you're like, oh, okay, the movie's gonna end one way. And then it has a flip, in the last second. And that's one of those things that people, I think, didn't see. So I recommend it more than anything. I won't tell you, obviously won't tell you what the flip is, but it has a thing that happens. But yeah, make sure you just watch it to that part. Yeah. So right now I'm doing a lot of Asian horror lately. Anime and also that, and just Kingdom in general. I'm like, I need another season. How you just gonna leave me with homegirl coming back, being clean, being saved from being a zombie, but now she's a super villain that was a zombie that can control zombies now? I'm like, how? Yeah, and the mixture of the historical part of Korea with the whole zombie aspect, it was chef's kiss. That's all I can say about Korea's really doing everything for me right now. That's the market I'm most obsessed with right now.
Oh yeah. And last night I watched Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead.
So did I.
It was okay.
Yeah, I didn't like it as much as Dawn of the Dead. That he did in 2004. I love Dawn of the Dead.
Well, Dawn of the Dead was him as a younger director, and I think he didn't have to work hard. He had to work harder.
Yes.
He wasn't Zack Snyder 300.
Yeah, he wasn't the guy now. Yeah.
He was, Zack Snyder that did that remake of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
That dude. It wasn't It wasn't, Zack Snyder, 300.
Yeah.
Sucker Punch, which no, let's not talk about Sucker Punch. Let's move from that. I had such high hopes for Sucker Punch too. I thought I was like, I'm gonna love it. And I was just like, what is this bullshit? With Zack Snyder, he does something well, but you never know if you're gonna like it, if you're gonna hate it, if you're gonna love it. I love Dave Bautista.
Yeah, me too.
He's always fun.
Yeah.
I didn't go into this looking for I knew that it wasn't going to be a hardcore, scary thing, right? Yeah. It was like bank robbers in Vegas. I did enjoy Michael Jai White though.
No, Omari Hardwick.
No,
Omari Hardwick. They look so similar.
Oh, now I'm gonna get my black card taken because I just said we all look alike. I am out to gang, y'all.
When you said, I was like, wait, well, yeah, no, it's Omari Hardwick, but
Amari Hardwick,
great,
which it reminded me of Michael Jai White. Yeah, Amari Hardwick. Sorry if you're hearing me, Amari Hardwick.
That's an honor. They're both like, he's such a great actor. Michael Jai White's amazing.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And they're both like wonderful characters. I love looking at, I love seeing, I love it when they appear on screen for multiple reasons. But I wasn't expecting it. I liked that my favorite character was the like little, I think the German safecracker. Yeah. That was cool. And the helicopter pilot, she was pretty cool.
Yeah. Taking Tara, I liked her.
I know that she's a comedian, but I've never seen her act before. But now I'm going to do it. I think Army of the Dead had a fun cast. Mm-hmm. The intelligent zombie part, I don't want to ruin it for people. Well, you know what? Everybody's got Netflix. If you ain't seen it yet, too bad.
Pause it right now. If you haven't seen it, go watch and then come back and listen to us.
Yeah, pause this. Go watch the movie. Come back. There's a lot of cheesiness in that film too. Like the scene where like he gets the body and they open it. I don't want to tell people what happens, but it was just like, oh, come on, dog. Yeah. Like
the zombie, I know the zombie queen aspect was cool, but then just like done too quickly. I was like, oh, all right. I thought she was like kind of cool for the time being we had her. And then we only got like for a couple of scenes. I was like, oh, okay. Well,
I wanted her to be more of a hive queen.
Me too. I was like, I thought I wanted her to be the number one villain as opposed to like the other guy. I was like, she's way more interesting. And then I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the Las Vegas showgirl that turns into the queen of the zombies.
Yeah.
Way more interesting, especially if it was like intelligent zombie. Yeah. Even though the intelligent zombie's not new, because was it Veen Rames?
Oh yeah. Well, they also had the intelligent zombies and what do you call it? Will Smith. I Am Legend.
I'm Legend, but they weren't as intelligent as the one where I think was it Veen Rames that comes back as a zombie and he's like a mechanic. He was a mechanic in a former life. He comes back as a zombie. It's one of the it is. I'll have to remember it because it is one of the Night of the Living Dead. It's one of the Night of the Living Deads. I'm trying to think which one, but it's the one where there's a zombie world and there's intelligent zombies.
Yeah.
And the poster is a black mechanic and he is the king of the zombies.
I think that's Land of the Dead.
Land of the Dead, yes. Yeah. So Land of the Dead was where we were really introduced to the intelligent zombies.
Yeah.
And like I Am Legend, they were a little, they were clever.
Yeah. But
they weren't like the same as the Land of the Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Land of the Dead. There's definitely like zombie-like things in Resident Evil. Mm-hmm. A whole entire series of that. But I really thought when the Zombie Queen came out, I was like, hell yeah.
I was so pumped for her. I thought her like look and everything was so cool. And they had to barter with her. I loved that aspect.
Yeah. It gave me a little bit of the like, this is Bartertown vibes.
Yeah.
I really like that. She gave me, what is it, Aunt Entity? I was like, oh, woo, I was ready. Yeah. And then once again, it became male zombie must defend his queen. And I was like, oh, Jesus, yo.
While we're on that topic, two things that drove me nuts that this happened twice. And again, this is a spoiler. I don't like how they killed two of Batista's love interests. Like one was bad. I'm like, okay, you can't like just like fridge a woman like that. But the second one, I was like, two of them, huh? That's a choice. The
whole love interest aspect in the middle of a damn zombie movie is just annoying to me.
So annoying too.
It's and like, then they just killed why?
Her. Like, what? I know. And I was like, all right. I didn't like that part at all.
And the daughter, I'm like, why the kid? I mean, I guess he had to have something at stake, but like his life in general was enough to be at stake. His team was at stake.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like they wanted to give like zombies, and he wanted to throw his like Fast and Furious little vibe in there with, you know, I mean, it was nice to see there was definitely more females in that movie.
Oh, a ton,
definitely a predominantly female film.
Yeah.
But they were still secondary.
Yes.
Like I was like, okay, I like the fact that his team had a lot of women on it, but I wanted like there to be the zombie queen. She looked cool.
Yeah.
She looked cool. She had a cool vibe. When she showed up, you're like, hell yeah.
Or the mom in the beginning too, that I thought was really, really cool. Like, and I thought the opening was amazing. When they were showing the pictures, like who they were, and like that one mom, like that saves her daughter and she dies. And I was like, I want to see a whole movie about what she was doing. She was like really, really cool at the beginning too. But that whole picture thing that they did to introduce characters is such a throwaway thing they did in this movie that I'm like, I wish they did it. Like, I loved it. I just wish that it could be done again, but it can't. But like, it was a really cool way to show who the people were and who their families were, in a really kind of a cheesy look. But I was like, it was a creative choice that I thought was brilliantly done. Yeah,
but we could do a whole show about Zack Snyder and his female characters.
Yeah, that could be,
and how he portrays his female characters, even when they are the lead, even when they are predominantly the cast.
Yeah, there
could be a whole nother topic about how Zack Snyder and his female characters work on camera.
Yes,
but we're not going to get into that because I hope that maybe one day as an actor, because if he goes, hey girl, you want to roll in this movie? I'll be like, of course I'll play that supporting role.
Yeah,
of course. This interview's going to come back to haunt me, but maybe.
I don't think so. I don't think so. He'll appreciate your integrity. He'll appreciate your integrity about it. Like, you know what? Maybe that is something I need to change. So,
well, I am on the journey of not only being in this film, but I am a female producer.
There you go.
I'm a female horror producer. So who knows where the next horror movie might take me. I do have another film that I'm working on right now. But it is so in the beginning stages. We are at script level right now.
Okay.
I may be doing some work with Full Moon Entertainment from the people who did Puppet Master.
Okay.
Actually, I did do a movie with them already. I worked with them on a film called Familian 2.
Okay.
We are discussing having a further relationship, maybe as a producing role or a film role. So, I mean, as I'm getting my feet wet in the horror genre, I am just excited to be getting into this, even though I'm looking around and there's not many of me.
No, which is really cool, actually. It's like, I like that you're diving into this, and yeah, I'm excited to see all your movies you start putting out here.
Yeah, especially in Minneapolis, especially not in just Minneapolis, but in the industry in general. There are women coming to the forefront of horror, but where I'm working out of, we're just burnt the city down because it was that racist. There's definitely, I've definitely have felt the flack from being a strong woman in the film industry trying to make things.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it everything. Of course, one of the very first things I got when I was trying to take a strong role and get something made on a different horror movie, I got difficult.
Yeah.
You know how they love calling women of color or people of color difficult when we speak up
bossy.
Ourselves.
Yeah.
Bossy, difficult. I heard that she did something on another set. She's difficult.
Yeah.
And it would be like, I'm so difficult, but I'm working on all these films and I'm in all these commercials and I'm on TV shows. Like, somebody who's difficult, I'm working a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fighting against that and trying to find my own place in the horror arena in general. I feel like starting in a place that is such a white boys club, it's going to help me move further into this genre when I'm in the big boys club. Absolutely. When I'm in the big boys, all like country club.
Absolutely.
I feel like this was the test, and even coming out of the throes of depression from dealing with the racism here and the situation, I was able to still produce and pull off a film with the help of a lot of friends.
That's amazing.
With the help of a lot of friends, I had a lot of strong women on my cast that maybe in other situations would have been called difficult or overstepping their boundaries. And I loved it. I felt like that was part of that. That's also something that was cathartic about it. It was kind of like the end of the full end of me coming out of that depression that was caused by being told I was difficult, not being able to speak up for myself because who was going to listen, and that whole idea that had been put upon me since I had been here. So there's multiple levels on why I feel like the film that I did, Ouroboros, is a good beginning to what I hope is a very long career in horror and fantasy and sci-fi and drama and everything that comes with the industry, but predominantly horror.
Yeah.
This was my birthright. My first film had to be a horror movie.
Absolutely.
You know, I actually tried to produce a horror film before for YouTube 10 years ago. And they were all terrible. Like if you go to my YouTube, Queen Kong Kai, like King Kong, but Queen Kong.
I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. I tried to redo a version of Stephen King's Starship Wormwood.
Okay.
You know, by myself in a room with one camera. You know, I tried to make a serial killer film that I got 2 episodes out of, but it just hit a point where I couldn't keep making a whole horror movie by myself.
Yeah.
You know, it was just too much. And then I had also tried to make a horror movie because I had bought the rights to a Stephen King's Dollar Baby film.
Oh, yeah. I've actually heard of it. That's really cool. But
that was the one situation where being a woman of color put a lot of stops and a lot of blockages and a lot of insecurity in me when I tried to do that. And I saw that all of a sudden I was a narcissist. I was difficult. I was, all these things that was attributed to me because how dare this woman of color step into this role? How dare she thinks that she can go and produce film or make a horror movie? How dare she do that? And I, I was a little bit younger and I let that infiltrate my brain. I let that become part of, I let that become a voice that was in my head that was like, oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. And, I'm open and honest about the depression that happened after that. But this film Ouroboros, with its it's gory. There's no way around it. We don't pull punches. We don't close our eyes when gore comes. It's happening, and the horror feels real. It feels visceral. It was definitely felt like a breakthrough, not in the horror genre, but a breakthrough for me as a woman of color that had to deal with the racism, had to deal with the disbelief. I lost friends over this. Wow. I lost friends. I made enemies to get these movies, to get to this point where I could make this Ouroboros. I lost close friends. I can't tell you that I'm going to be real. There were some nights I definitely cried.
Yeah.
I cried over the friends I lost, trying to make this movie that thought I was, stepping into shoes that were too big to fill. There was all of a sudden jealousy coming from people that I loved. There's sabotage. It was so much of, wow, what am I doing that's making these people react besides just being myself as a woman of color and going, I'm going to make a movie.
Yeah.
You can't stop me from making a movie. I'm going to make this movie come hell or high water. So there's a lot about that felt like a breakthrough. For me personally, whether people see the movie and they go, gee, shatter the ceiling. They're probably not going to say that. They're not going to be like, hey, it's Rated Flash, y'all.
They might, right? You never know until it's actually out and the reception from it. So
yeah, until it's actually out and the reception from it, we won't know. But I wanted to make a small little horror film, a small little scary horror film, a little cautionary tale for boys walking home at night. For men walking home at night, so they can kind of understand part of the horror that me as a woman, and not just a woman of color, but women feel. But I mean, we can also bring women of color in there because no matter what we see on TV, women of color are the ones that are sexually trafficked and kidnapped the most in our country. We live in that horror movie all the time. So I want to make a little cautionary tale that helps men see the horror from a different aspect.
I'm very, very excited to see it when it comes out here.
Me too. My editor is this amazing woman named Victoria Tanley. She works with Ethcom Studios. And I'm just so excited. I am so excited to see what she does with it. I've been trying to keep myself from being the overbearing, hey, I what about that right there? No, the other one. No, this one. no, you need to, no, I'm trying not to do that. I'm not doing the over the shoulder thing, even though I'm incredibly excited. I've been like, send me screenshots every day. Every day I've been like, have screenshots, please. And she's like, I have to organize it first. I have to do this. And I'm like,
yeah, that's fair.
Give it to me now. But I think once it's out, once we're able to see it, once I'm able to, put it different places, I hope it resonates with some people. It definitely resonated with me. It's a vibe that I wanted to bring to it is I don't know if people know this, the director of The Mummy, I think it's George I can't remember, Galapinas or Galapinas. I can't remember what his name is, right?
Okay.
His first student film was a film called Groping. And if you've never seen the horror movie Groping,
no.
It was about the vicious rape and murder of a woman that took place in front of hundreds of people viewing it inside of their apartments in New York City.
I've heard of the story.
I think her name was Kitty Carlisle or something.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring a little bit of that into the film, a little bit of the creeping darkness that you can't escape from, the bleakness. I wanted to bring that in there, and it's a similar story, but told from a more, I wouldn't say equal, but it's definitely a horror movie to scare guys walking home at night.
Right.
Or in bars being creepy, or it's a power shift. But any of you out there that actually, you can see Groping on YouTube, and I remember watching that when the Sci-Fi Channel had a show where I think her name was Shannon Doherty, would host like small little horror anthology. I can't remember what it was called. And I remember that just terrifying me, because you saw her walking home and then you'd see this like the man moving in the shadows and his erratic behavior and how she moves and the slow, minute movements that eventually lead to this like horrific rape and murder that happens in front of people. And when you realize that it's a true story, and you're like, as a woman, you're like, that could be me any day.
For sure.
I'm the person that likes going walking after midnight in the moonlight.
Yeah.
Like a Patsy Cline song. But the dark can hold many things that are scary, and lots of women don't come home.
Yeah, very true. And that's why I'm very excited to see your story, because it's kind of a flip on that, and I think that people learn a lot more from, well, as we've been saying through this, they learn a lot more through media. And they will learn a lot more through your story. So I'm very excited to see when this comes to fruition, when you finish there.
Me too. I love the poster we did for it. I want to give a shout out to a bunch of people, but I know that the screenwriter, he doesn't want to get a shout out until it's actually done.
Okay, fair enough.
That type of person, until it's like sitting there and it's playing in front of him. So I'm going to keep that on the low, but I am so blessed to find people that want to work with me and want to share my vision and don't care that I'm a woman of color, that want to bring these things to life, to want to bring these things to fruition, who want to make things that challenge what we know, that challenge what we know in horror, that challenge what we know in life. I'm super excited about this film, Ouroboros. I wish I could tell everybody the plot of it, but that would ruin it. But there is a Ouroboros, the film Facebook page right now.
Okay.
I have not started the Instagram, and we're currently working on I'm working on a website, but part of me is just like, it's a short film. And the other part of me is like, so what?
Well, as far as Facebook, I can put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Yeah.
So Ouroboros is on Facebook as just a page right now. I definitely big up West Coast Strange.
Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Actually, the writer of Ouroboros is the one that got me hooked on West Coast Strange.
Oh, no way. Well,
yeah, the writer of Ouroboros was like posting it in his stories.
Yeah.
And I was just like, ooh, that's me all day. And he like posts a lot of West Coast Strange stuff in his stories. Yeah, he got me hooked on West Coast Strange. He started posting things from West Coast Strange. And I was just like, I am vibing with this person.
Oh, that's so nice.
Like, yeah, like I was like everything you post, I'm just like, that's awesome. I vibe with that all day. So in my mind, I had to, you were like, let's do audio, but I had to know if you were Black like me or.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't know that. It would be confusing because a lot of my like even just the images that I post sometimes, like for the icons, are like black hands clapping. So like or like black fists like up or anything like that. So people like watch like that don't know what I look like. They're probably like, is he black?
Oh yeah, I had to
Yeah.
know. I was just like, I think I think he's black like me. And I mean like me as in like we definitely have when it comes to we're on the same vibe. So black like me as in
Absolutely.
not just that we're black, but
Yeah,
we are considered alternative.
absolutely. We are.
We are considered a break to what is considered black,
Yeah,
what
that's
is
very true.
considered African American, what is considered like what this is what did Dave Chappelle say? Which I if you've been on my page, you saw who left me a voicemail message the other day.
Yeah, I did. I did.
White people do this,
Yeah.
black people do that. You know, and we are breaking through those boundaries in general just by being like these horror fanatics, being these horror fans, being these people who want to dissect the darker parts of life, even though we're like, you seem like a very big ball of sunshine, which you're probably a very happy person, but we are people who love the things that go bump in the night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Watch the things in the dark come to light, watch people fight the monsters and sometimes lose.
It's true. Like I do like a bleak horror film. I'm a happy person. I do like those types of horror movies.
I like it all. I don't care
too.
how it ends, as long
Me
as
too.
I got to go on the journey into the horror film.
Yeah.
Or not just film, even the anime, because you know I do love me some horrific horror films, horror animes. I love all of that. Like Blue Exorcist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the most wonderful part about that is that we are still happy people, but we're able to explore this darkness.
I agree.
And I am so honored that you let me come on your show.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on my show. I know where to find you online, but where can everyone else find you online so they can get some more updates on your movies? Not just
or just my life in general. I warn you guys that my pages are 18 and over. I'm an adult. No matter what you think, I'm an adult. So if you are a child, do not be on my page.
I'll put that one out there.
Well, I have a lot of different jobs on top of being, horror. Like, let's be very real. Horror and sex will always be wrapped up with each other.
Yeah.
Death and sex are always going to be wrapped up in each other, no matter how we cut it.
Yeah.
It's like sex, death, birth, or love, death, and robots. But we can get into the conversation about that some other time.
Sounds like another episode we're gonna have to do with love, death, and robots.
But, and I am no different than that. So if you find me, like I said, my name on Facebook is Madeline Fleming. It should be MadelineKarita Fleming, but Facebook asked me for my birth certificate and social security card, and I was just like, y'all can call me what you want. Yeah. You're not getting any of that from me.
That's too much.
That's too much. You want to call me Madeline Fleming? Cool. Facebook, you're not getting my birth certificate. Yeah. You're not getting my social security card. That was before we found out that they were letting Steve Bannon get information from them. But something in me was just like,
Yeah, that's too a red flag.
Yeah. So Facebook, it's Madeline Fleming, and on the rest of the world, I'm known as Queen Kong Kai, like King Kong, but Queen Kong with a K-I. And that's everywhere. That's Instagram. That's YouTube. That is my TikTok. That is my moniker. That is me in the great, big, wide social media world.
Perfect. Well, I'll put links to all of those things in the show notes as well, so everyone can follow you and keep up to, well, I was going to say with your movies, but also your life. So yeah, I'll put that all in the show notes there. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for teaching me about what's going on in Minneapolis too. That was really, 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 really interesting because I didn't know. And yeah, I really appreciate that.
Well, you know what? What's happening here is just as wrapped up into horror as any horror movie I've ever watched.
Yeah.
It was the one place where I can say that I could bring actual horror from my life into the horror arena in film.
Yeah.
I was able to bring some of that feeling of helplessness. I was able to bring some of that, that voice screaming in the darkness with a pillow over their face that's never going to get home, and that's something that Ouroboros is going to bring to the screen too. But I am so thankful. I shot my shot And I'm glad that you answered and let me be on this show tonight.
I was so excited to have you on. As soon as you started like telling me, I'm like, yeah, I got this movie coming. I was like, I want to hear more about it. So I'm so excited to have you on, and I'm so glad you came on. Thank you so
Yay! Much. Okay, let me give a shout out to my mama, Jesus, little Ray Ray, Pookie, Fathead. No, just I mean, yeah, but actually a shout out to my mama. That has to go there. And a shout out to my wonderful team, Deathcom Studios, the amazing special effects team, led by Ben Gersh, and my actors, Ernest Howard, Nick Max Thompson. There's a little monster in it. Her name is Sarai Sanchez or Sarah Sanchez.
Okay.
So it is also predominantly people of color in this.
Nice.
I'm
very excited to talk about that movie when it comes out too and post about that.
Yes.
So I'll post updates about it too, because I love to promote horror on my page. So I'll definitely post updates about it as well.
Oh yeah, make sure give me a shout out on the page. Throw me up on West Coast Horror.
Definitely will. All right. Well, thank you, and everyone else that's listening or watching. Have a great night, day, or wherever you are. And it's been another episode of No Stranger to Horror. Good night, everybody.
Stay out of the darkness, y'all. No.